Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to take crayons and fabric and make beautiful Christmas ornaments. We'll also stitch them together and stitch them with embellishments. Now you could add buttons and beads if you'd like, or you can just use stitches to enhance that ornament. I stuff them, but not with traditional fluff stuffing. I just use batting, but you can use whatever you have. If you don't have batting, you can use just an extra piece of fabric. This makes for a very simple, economical, and enjoyable process. You don't have to go out and buy anything new. I like to use cookie cutters to create my shape. Now the cookie cutters come in many shapes for the holidays. And because of their simple shape, you can enhance them with either your crayons or your embellishments and stitches, or all three. I like to make really simple ones. I'll show you two procedures for creating the shading on those ornaments and then enhancing them with stitches and extras. So let's get started. So to get started, I have my fabric. Now over here is the quilted fabric. This is what I'll use for the Christmas tree. And then I'll have the muslin piece here using the gingerbread man. I'll show you first the Christmas tree and the shading on that. And with the gingerbread man, we're going to have to do some work after we create the coloring. And that uses this fusible adhesive and this batting. So I'll set this aside for now. We'll work on that later. So to create my image, I just take my cookie cutter. Now you could sketch this. You don't have to use a cookie cutter. You could use a template. But I like to take the cookie cutter, I find a spot with just a little bit of a border around it. And then I trace, and I like to trace the outside of the cookie cutter. So I hold it down fairly securely, try not to let it move, and then I just trace the lines. Now if it's something a little more complicated, I'll trace all the lines going down and then go back in and trace the lines going up. Because it's fabric, it tends to move a little bit. So there I have the outline of my tree. Now the reason I like to use cookie cutters is because they're very simple images and there's a lot of places you can go with your coloring. So right from here, because this fabric has a little bit of weight to it, because it's quilted, I don't need to iron some freezer paper on the back. I just like to use my hands to hold it taut for the coloring. So I'll cut out this piece to a more reasonable, manageable size, get out my crayons, and we'll start our shading. So when working with crayons and fabric, I like to keep a sharpener handy. On the back of big boxes, they have sharpeners built in, but I keep my crayons just in a little tub here. And I'll peel down the label to help make the crayon sharper. So now you have to decide how you want to decorate this image. Do you want to draw ornaments on it? Or do you want to make it look realistic like a tree? Or do you want to make it look like a cookie so you'll have a little bit of cookie showing and then the frosting? And I think I'll do that. So what I like to do for that is I'll make a little sketch of where the frosting ends and where the cookie shows. So I go back to my marker here, just a permanent marker. And because frosting doesn't usually have precise edges, I like to just make a little bit of a border with little rounded edges. And I'll just follow the guide here that exists already on the cookie. So now for me, the key in making this look realistic like a cookie in fabric is to have a lot of variation in color, to go from light to dark. So there'll be a lot of contrast. So to do that, I'll use the colors, the standard colors for say cookie, for example, a green tree and a brown cookie, but I'll have a lot of variation. So if I'm using the green to get it to look darker, I'll use the inverse on the color wheel. I'll add a little bit of red in there, and it won't necessarily show as red. It will just make the green more intense, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's start by coloring that portion of the cookie that's going to show. Now, I always take a piece of paper here because sometimes the colors, how they look in the wax stick, isn't exactly how they show up. So that's like a beige. They call this tumbleweed. And that's not exactly the color I want for the cookie. I'll use it, but it's not the color I'm looking for currently. And so then there's this color, raw sienna, which is a little closer to what I'm looking for. I also keep white and a gray and a black. What I want to do first is take my white, clean off any specks of other color that might remain. And now I'm just going to cover the inside of that cookie area with the white of the crayon. And this will fill the little gaps in the fabric, the little weave and the space there, the texture, with a little bit of white. And this will give me a little bit more chance to blend color on top of it. So you can't really see that in the camera, but I've gone around making a little bit of white. So now to make it look like a cookie, I want to start from the outermost area, my darkest area. And I'm looking to audition a color for that. And I have sepia here, which is a pretty good color. I also need a sharp point. So I'll just peel some of this paper label here and then just sharpen this crayon. So now that I have a sharp point, I can come in over here and just lightly go around the edge of my cookie. And I'll do that all the way around the edge of the cookie. So that's the sepia, and I went around the edge of the cookie. So now I want to take a lighter color, and I have 3 colors here that I'm using. I'm going to take the lightest one, which is this tumbleweed here, and I'm going to go up against the edge of the frosting, just filling that in. I'm trying to leave a little bit of a space in between the darkest color that I've already put down and this color. So now I have my darkest color, the edge of the cookie, my lightest color, the most undercooked part of the cookie as we get to the center. And now I'm taking my medium color here, which is this color, the raw sienna, and I'm just going over both the darkest color and the lightest color. And if you remember, we have a little bit of that white crayon already on our fabric. So this will help it to blend and just go over that area. The white kind of fills in the little gaps in the fabric, and then this color sits on top of that. Now, right now, I want to see a little more contrast. This is me being fussy. You can stop here if you want. So I found this brown crayon. It's just a little bit darker than the darkest color we used. And I'm just going to blend that around some of the areas, not all of it, just around some of the areas like the top and some of these points here. I just think that makes it a little more realistic, like a cookie, where it gets little burnt edges, or at least well done edges. Now I can go back in with that lightest color again, just really to make this a little more intense and to intensify what's there. And by going over the area that I've already colored in with the darkest colors, it just blends it out a little bit more. So I'm quite pleased with that. And now I want to make the rest of this look like frosting. Now to do that, I need to have a lot of highlights, and I want to have a lot of gradient. So I want it to be darkest and just blend across the cookie, particularly this area. So I'm going to take my white again, and I'm really going to go over that cookie. I'm not going close to the edge, just going really in the center here. And I'll just go over it a few times. And now I have a bunch of greens, so I'm going to audition those as well. This one is a yellow green. I'm not sure if I'm going to use this or not. But then I have this green. So I have an assortment of greens. I think I like these last 3 greens here. So I'll set these 2 aside. Found the sea green. Try that. That's very close to this color, but I think these 4 will work for me. So here they are. I'm going to start with the lightest color. I'm going to go with the sea green on this. And I'm just going to blend just right from the edge inward. I'm leaving the center of that cookie uncolored at this point. So I like that nice blend. I'm going to take this color and I'm just going to very lightly go over the center, barely laying down any color. I just want a little bit less contrast with the stark white, the center of the cookie. So just a little bit of color. So now I'm looking at this. This crayon is also labeled sea green. Let me see if there's any difference. There's a little bit of difference, so I guess it was a different batch. I'm going to take that second sea green and just go over some of the points here where the edge of this cookie frosting meets the cookie. And again, I'm just trying to get a nice gradual gradation and blending. So that's coming along well. I'm going to take the next color here. This is asparagus. We'll just double check to see what that is. Okay, so I know I want to just actually jump to this color. And this is forest green. And again, starting at the outermost edge, because it's my darkest color, I'm going to blend inward. I'll go over all the little points this way. And lastly, I'll come in with that dark color, that asparagus, right on the edge. Just going to go up, holding the fabric taut so that I can really lay down color. And I'll just go up on the top of all these branches. So now I have a really nice design here. I want to go back in with my sea green and just kind of smooth out those edges just so that it's a nice blending. I'll hold the fabric taut, just make some circles. I don't want to see any lines. And now I'm going to take my red crayon and just go around the edge very lightly of the line that I made that makes the difference between the cookie and the frosting. And again, I want to blend that out. I don't want that to be a perfectly straight line. And by using the complementary color to that green, it darkens it up. So now I'm going to go back in there with that forest green and go over that red that I made. Again, I'm trying to make it more intense. Now you can do this process as much as you want until you develop the intensity you want. Now if I wanted more darkness, I'd come in with the gray or even the black and just go over the edge just a little bit more. So I think I'll just do that very lightly. And this is the gray, just gray. And it just adds a little more depth, a little more contrast. And you could play around with this, doing this as much as you'd like. So now, because I know I like to stitch on these ornaments, maybe I'll add some beads or a star. I'm really happy with this one. The next stage is to take the iron and really set that color and remove the wax. So now I've plugged in my iron so it's heating up and I have a paper towel here. I'm going to take my colored piece, just hold my towel on top of it, and then I just iron, pressing over the colored piece, and I'll just hold it in place, moving the iron every so often. And then when I pull up the paper towel, you can see it's taken off some of the dye, but the wax is absorbed into the paper towel. So now I'm just going to fold this over, or actually I'll just come over here and do it again. And I do this until there's no more imprint on the paper towel. If it removes too much of the dye from the fabric, I'll just go back over with my crayons until I get the intensity that I'm looking for. And my iron is set to the setting of my fabric that I'm using, the cotton setting. So I have a little bit of residue here. I want to do this one more time. Again, I'm always trying to remove that wax buildup. Take the wax out of the crayons and leave just the pigment in the fabric. Now this is not going to be laundered, so I don't have to really worry about making it permanent. This would stain the fabric with the crayon dye, but if I wanted to make it permanent, I would use a textile medium. So that looks pretty good. The next stage for this would be to cut it out and stitch it up. Let me show you how I make the gingerbread man using fabric that isn't quilted. So now, because this is just muslin fabric, just cotton fabric, what I want to do is add my color first, and then I'll pat it with the batting and the fusible adhesive. So I'll set these two pieces aside for now. Here I have a little piece of freezer paper. It has plastic on one side and paper on the other. This step is completely optional, but what I like to do is iron the freezer paper, the plastic side, to one side of my fabric. It's a temporary hold, and it just creates a little more body on the fabric so that I can color it a little bit easier. So I just melt that plastic. It sticks to the fabric, and again, it's temporary. And to get the edges, I don't want to melt plastic on my iron, so I flip it over. So I'm just ironing the paper. So here I have my freezer paper with my fabric. I only need to iron enough to create my design. So I'll trim up this fabric, and then just like I did with the Christmas tree, I only need as much fabric as I need to trace my design here. So I'll trim this up with my scissors and outline this just like I did with the Christmas tree. It just makes it easier to do this now, the coloring, before the batting is on. You could put the batting on first, but I prefer to do it this way. So here I have my design traced on using the cookie cutter. I want to continue keeping the freezer paper on the back of this fabric. So now I'm going to choose my color crayons. So I've created my marks here, my little palette of the browns that I have so I can see what they really look like, how they translate outside of the wax crayon. I have a brown sepia, burnt sienna, raw sienna, and then the tumbleweed. Then I have my white and my gray. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is take my white and color on the inside of this gingerbread man. Now, instead of making this look like a frosted cookie, I just want the whole thing to look like a cookie. And then when I stitch on it, I'll embellish the buttons and the little trim and any outfit I want to put on him. So I'm just going over this. Again, I don't have to stretch the fabric, but I do like to hold it in place so it doesn't wrinkle. And as I move it, it tends to come off the freezer paper a little bit. So I just got to keep that in mind. So now I have a lot of white on this. You can't really see it on camera yet. I'm going to start with my lightest color, and that's the tumbleweed. And I'm going to start at the edge and just work my way around the perimeter. I'm doing little circles. So now I've colored around here, trying to make the outermost portion the darkest. And then I'm just gently blending it inward. I don't want any harsh lines. And I can just continue to go over it as often as needed to get that blend. I'm going to reblend with this color after I've put my other colors down, but I like to just start off with a nice clean look, and I like to have the center of that cookie nice and light. That creates a lot of depth. So I'll set my color aside. I'm going to go in there with my next color in progression, starting to go dark. This is the raw sienna, and I'm going to start on the outside and again make another layer of circles, not going as deep as that first layer. So if the first layer I moved maybe an inch or so in, this I'll go about 3/4 of the way in. And again, I want the lightest pressure to be on the center of the cookie and the most heavy pressure on the outer edges. So now I'm using my burnt sienna, which is starting to add a little bit of red to the cookie, which is what I want for that ginger effect. And again, I'll do the same thing here, going in with this color, just building up my layers. So I took my burnt sienna, colored in very lightly in the center of that cookie. I still have a nice variation from the center to the edges. So now with my sepia, my second darkest color, I'm going to come in right from the edge and not go in very deep. I'm just trying to really darken up those edges before I go in with the last color. And now finally, I'll go in with my darkest color here, my brown. And I'm sticking to the edges pretty much here. Again, I don't want a solid line, so I'll just blend it out with little circles. And now that I have my entire piece done here, I'm going to take my tumbleweed and just blend out the edges of those darker colors right to the center. Might go over the center just a little bit, but I want to maintain that very light area. So I'll just go over it with little circles, blending it smoothly. So when I have that brown blended nicely, I'll take a little bit of the gray and just go over some of the edges here. Basically, wherever there's kind of a little intersection of points. So at the base of the head, underneath the arms, and where the legs meet. So that's just a little subtle effect, but it really makes the piece start to really pop with contrast. So now I want to heat set this and attach the batting to the back. So again, while it's still on the freezer paper, I'll take my paper towel and press out any of that wax and pick up any of that excess color. And that looks pretty good. If I want to color it again, add more intensity, I'll go over it with some more crayon. But I'm pretty happy with that. So now I need my supplies to make this a padded little cookie. So I can remove my fabric my little gingerbread man from my freezer paper. And I'll cut it off, leaving a little space of fabric around the gingerbread man. So now I have my fusible adhesive here. One side is smooth and one side is textured, and that texture is my adhesive. So I want to trim it down so there's no excess adhesive. I don't want it to go on my iron. And once I have it, I'll cover the textured side. Again, I'll take my paper towel just to make sure that there is no transfer on my iron, just to protect my iron. And now I'm taking that hot iron and pressing it all over. I want to cover that swatch of fabric that has the gingerbread man on it and make sure all that adhesive melts on the back of that fusible web. Looks pretty good. I like to just go over it on the back just in case there were any spots that didn't transfer accordingly. And now I just let it cool for a moment. So once it's cool to the touch, I just go to the edge here and remove that paper backing. And you can see that it's leaving, and you can feel that it's leaving a little bit of adhesive. The adhesive is minorly tacky. It's not going to stick to you, but you can feel it. So now I want to take this piece again and attach it to my batting. You could also use another piece of fabric if you don't have batting. Once again, I'm going to take my paper towel just to protect my iron, and using the heat from that iron, it's going to melt that adhesive again, and it's going to attach it to that piece of batting. So now I have my textured ornaments with a little bit of a cushion. You could just use them like this, cut them out and use them in a fabric book, but I want to add a backing and embellishments. And so this is the time to embellish them. I also wanted to show you the difference between using the quilted fabric and plain fabric. Just adds another dimension. I added a few more layers of color on this piece to really make it pop, but you get the idea. It's the same cookie cutter and you get different effects. So now I want to stitch, and I'm going to stitch onto my gingerbread man, and I'll do this one off camera. So because it's a gingerbread man, you can have a lot of fun with it. You can use rickrack to be indicative of frosting. So this is standard rickrack. It's just barely off-white. And this is some miniature rickrack I happened to find. And this is perfect for this small element. So I'll use some of this. If you don't have rickrack, you can use lace. You can just use stitches as well. And I also have this little trim, which I think would make an adorable little addition. So I'm going to put a little rickrack around each of the legs and the arms here. I'll just cut it out. And you could glue it down, but I'm going to stitch it down just with some tiny stitches. So now it's time to choose the little accessories that I want to add. If I want to add eyes or buttons down the front. I love to do this part. It's just so fun to go through your button stash and see what you might want to add. I think that little white heart's cute, but this is also cute. So I'll kind of play around just deciding what I want to put on this guy. And I have some buttons for the eyes. I have these little black ones, which are really cute. I also have these, which kind of remind me of glasses. So I'll just kind of play around here. Well, ultimately, I decided to go with that little kind of star-like item. I've got 2 white buttons and the black button. And then for a mouth, you can stitch it. I'm going to draw it with a little pen. But first, I want to attach these buttons to my piece. So I added all my little embellishments, both on the tree and the little gingerbread man. You can see my stitches on the back. You can do exclusively stitches. You don't have to add the little trim and the buttons if you don't want, or the beads. It's up to you. I just think it adds a little interesting touch. It makes you want to look at it and see what else is there. The next stage is to clip around your shapes. Now, I like to leave a little bit of a border, maybe 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch border. And so I'll cut around each of these shapes. So they're all cut out. Now I want to take my felt, and for each one, I want to trace around the shape, the new shape that I have for my cutting. So I'll do that for both of them. So now, if you wanted to attach this to a page of a fabric book or something like that, or a card, you could just stitch it down.
But because I have the desire to make it into an ornament, I'm going to put a backing on it. And I'm just going to stitch around the edge with a blanket stitch. Before I do that, I'm going to take just this little velvet trim and stitch it to my piece here, just so I have a little hanger for it. And then I'll stitch it to my backing. So now they're ready to be put on a tree or used as a gift topper. And that's how you make them, using just a cookie cutter, crayons, and your fabric. And of course, any embellishments you want.
So that's how I create Christmas ornaments, particularly custom and detailed ones, using cookie cutters, crayons, and fabric. I also use some extras, but use what you have. Use what you have around the house and what you have in your supply. I have other videos for Christmas ornaments that you can make and Christmas tidbits that you can add to your fabric journals, and I'll link those below. I have some from years past and some from this year as well. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. And for additional content, consider becoming a paid member of my channel, where I give additional videos and behind-the-scenes footage. Thanks for joining me today.